In this lesson, we'll learn how to animate the Google logo and analyze techniques and methods to improve animation. In the previous lesson, we learned the basics of easings. Let's complicate the task now. Jumping and following objects. This technique is often used to reveal a logo. It all seems simple at first glance, but problems begin when it comes to practice. Beginners can even miss noticing the issues due to lack of experience. As you might have noticed, the problem is that the objects freeze in the air wrongly and move simultaneously. But the latter is not that important at the moment. Let's analyze how to correctly animate a jump on the example of the letter from the Google logo. Before starting to work on animation, you must define the area where the letters and parts of a logo will be revealed. It is better if all the elements of a logo are revealed in a small compact area in the center of a composition. This way the viewer will stay focused and the elements will not be trimmed along the edge of the frame while appearing. Think through the general timing, easing, and the order in which elements will be appearing. In this case, parts of the logo will be revealed one by one, and the entire reveal animation will take about 3 seconds. The main movement in it will be the flying out and falling of the logo parts. So, flying out or jumping objects. In real life, when you throw a ball or any other object up, notice how it freezes at some point for a mere second before falling. You'll need to recreate the same thing in animation. As a result, it will look natural. There should be an impulse in the beginning, then the object freezes at some peak point, and falls down with acceleration. In attachments for this lesson, you can find a project. Open the composition and you'll see a logo prepared to be animated. Let's animate the way the letter G flies out. We will need 3 keyframes for this. Let's move backwards. Set the final position keyframe on the 24th frame in order not to waste time searching for it later. This is often an issue for beginners. Then move 12 frames back on the timeline and create the peak point. It is crucial. Without it, you will be unable to control the object's freezing. The 3rd keyframe defines from where the object will start flying out. Press F9 and check the result. Currently, it hardly resembles the final result. Let's adjust the graphs. Enable Graph Editor. The flying out should be impulsive, with a slowdown. The situation with the falling is opposite. It needs to be smooth, with an acceleration. To configure the way the object will freeze, you need to adjust the height of the midpoint. But first, you need to combine incoming and outgoing velocity. Double-click on the point and check this field here. That's it. Now using the height of this keyframe, you can adjust how the object freezes in the speed field, or do it manually in the graph. In addition to graphs, the weight and character of objects are influenced by the distance between keyframes and the length of the animation. It is clear that more active movements will end faster. In my case, the distance between the keyframes is the same, and the animation lasts 24 frames. The composition runs at 30 frames per second. This is the best speed. Flying out shouldn't be too slow or too fast in this case. So it is usually like that. The cases when the task is to make the flying out in slow motion or when an object should behave as if in zero gravity may be exceptions. It all depends on your task and imagination. But try to create animation taking the laws of physics into account and maintaining the overall pace for all elements. You can experiment with how objects freeze, but everything should be in harmony. In these examples, objects are flying out following the same principle. All objects usually move following arc-shaped trajectories. This is one of the animation principles. We already talked about it in the previous lesson. Now we will figure out how to use it in practice. Let's get back to the Google logo. Pay attention to how it is revealed. All letters except the first one fly out and follow arc-shaped trajectories. First, let's take a look at how the letters G and L are revealed. We will return to the rest later, as they are created in a different way. The lowercase letters G and L. Let's animate position the same way as we have done for the first letter and set the animation graphs. We will also add the flight trajectory by adjusting the points in space to form an arc. It is not necessary to make it an ideal semicircle. It all depends on the situation. Let's adjust the animation graphs. As you remember, the object should freeze at the peak point. Great. Now let's animate the letter L and create a trajectory for it. This animation will consist of 4 keyframes, of which 3 will be the animation of the object flying out, and additional 1 for the object sliding to the final position. Let's set the trajectory. Right-click on the selected keyframes and select the keyframe interpolation parameter. Apply linear interpolation. Apply Bezier only to the peak point. To do this, select Pen tool and holding down Alt, click on the right point. Let's make an arc and set animation graphs. The graph of flying out will be the same. We, however, need to make a seamless transition to sliding when it lands, creating the impression of uniform movement and speed. To achieve it, you need to set up such a graph. Let's finalize the animation and add rotation for the object. When it jumps in, the letter will be parallel to the x-axis. Before it reaches the peak point, it rotates 1 time. When it lands, it reaches its final position. Let's set the graphs. We will rotate it smoothly when it freezes. Raise this point a little to make the graph smoother. Great, let's see what we got. We have covered the principle on relatively simple examples, but it applies to more complex objects as well. Multi-component figures, characters, and any other objects will look natural and harmonious moving in arc-shaped trajectories, unless these are some kind of mechanical or very fast movements, as I mentioned in the previous lesson. Objects stretching is also quite often used in animation. But we will talk not about the squash and stretch principle in animation, but about the effect of a stretched object, and cover several ways to create it. In order not to get confused, take a look at these examples. The squash and stretch principle. It is used to convey the weight and elasticity of the shape of animated objects. To create realistic animation, it is important to maintain the volume of an object. If you stretch a ball vertically, then it should correspondingly squash horizontally. The stretching effect looks more expressive and is used to create a certain style of animation or convey the speed of an object. Let's analyze several ways to achieve this effect. The main thing is not to do it using scale. In this case, the shape of an object and the thickness of its lines will distort. You should maintain the thickness of the lines and the shape to keep an object recognizable in animation. The first method is to stretch objects using the path parameter. We will continue animating the Google logo and make the letter fly out with stretching. Select the letter with the capital letter G. We already have the animation of it flying out. We have made it to get familiar with the principle and adjust the right easing. If you have more complex objects, it is better to animate all of them using simple figures to determine the timing, easing, and the order in which the elements will be revealed. And then, following this example, you will be able to animate complex objects. Let's return to the logo. Duplicate the letter. We will use it as a reference. Place the duplicate letter a little to the left and delete all the keyframes for the first letter. To stretch out this object correctly, you need to add a couple of points to the path parameter. Add them where you want to stretch the object. Let me remind you that animation consists of the following stages: flying out, stretching, freezing, the object squashes, and falling down, stretching. Create the first keyframe on the 24th frame to avoid searching for the final position of the path later. Switch it to the toggle hold mode with Ctrl-Alt-Click. Go to the very beginning of the timeline and move path to the moment when the letter starts flying out. To make it easier to adjust path, switch the second keyframe to toggle hold as well. Otherwise, path will start moving and it creates problems. Next, let's do the stretching out. Select the upper part of the letter and drag it up to the reference. You can slightly raise the lower part as well. Then, copy the first keyframe and move path up following the reference. This is the moment the object starts freezing. If we were to create this animation using the position parameter, it would be enough to set 3 keyframes and adjust the graph. But since we are using path for it, we will create a slowdown using an additional keyframe at the peak point. Without it, you won't be able to create an appropriate pause. Copy the same keyframe and paste it a little further. We will control the freezing with it. For the falling down, duplicate the final keyframe and stretch the upper part of the letter up. Done. Press F9 and set up the easings so that the animation resembles the reference. All in all, the graph is the same as in the case with position, but the number of keyframes is higher. Let's check the result. Great. Let's move on. The next letter with the stretching is lowercase g. Let's combine the animation. We will leave the keyframes for position and stretch it when it is flying out with path. Let's create animation keyframes on path. This is the final shape. At the peak point, when the letter freezes, it returns to its normal size. Let's move the keyframes to the moment when the letter is at its peak. At the beginning of the timeline, stretch the lower part of the letter. The very first keyframe will be the original shape. Now let's adjust the easings. Excellent! Here are a couple of examples of how this technique is used. For more details and other ways of stretching, watch the bonus video. We have covered stretching with path. The letters O and E are made using shape modifiers. Let's see what this means. Animating the letter O. Using Ellipse tool, create a circle of about this size. It will be the movement trajectory. Leave only the stroke. We will not need filling. Next, add the trim paths and offset paths modifiers. Let's adjust the stroke parameters and its modifiers to make the shape the same as the letter. To round the shape, select Round Join in Offset Paths. Adjust the shape. I will paint and rename the layer. Let's animate using the Trim Paths modifier. The start of the reveal will approximately be in the final position. It will move clockwise. Create keyframes on the Trim Paths parameters. After a few frames, adjust trim paths for the final position. Press F9 and set the easings. Let's finalize the animation. To achieve the desired stretching, you need to adjust the offset between the keyframes. This offset is, in fact, the stretching setup. The wider it is, the wider is the stretching, given that their easings are the same. Let's continue adjusting. Yes, it's already better. You can also animate the offset parameter in trim paths. Okay, the animation is ready. Let's paint the shape in red. Animating the second letter O. The principle remains the same. You just need to make a different trajectory. For this, we will use Pen Tool. Create such a trajectory. The letter will fly out from the upper left part. The first time, it will land in front of the letter G. The second time, it will land in the final position. Let's copy the settings from the previous letter and animate trim paths. The most important thing is to adjust the effect of the letter freezing at the peak point. Here's what you should get. The last letter E will be revealed the same way as the red letter O, except it will be stretched out in the opposite direction. So we can copy and adjust it. Let's take a look at the result. Awesome! Here are a couple more examples accomplished using this stretching technique. As you can see, it looks quite impressive. Now let's set up the successive reveal of the letters. First, disable unnecessary layers and hide them. Arrange the layers. The letters will be displayed at about this speed. They do not overlap with each other, and the first and the last objects are emphasized, which sets the general easing for the animation. Cool! The only thing I don't like is how the lowercase g is stretching out. Let's make it the way it is in the original. Let's stretch the letter a little differently. Create the keyframes. The first and last will be the same. When the letter is stretching, move this part of the object down. And now copy the easings using the Easy Copy script. Done! Let's look at the result. Yes, it's much cooler now. At this stage, we already have the reveal of all the logo letters. It's time to refine small details to improve the animation. Let's start with the object deformation techniques and then proceed to damping oscillations. All these additional details are used to make the animation more expressive. Among these details are follow-through and overlapping actions, squashes and stretches, bounces, and offsets. We will start finalizing the animation with the uppercase G. When it freezes, it looks too clumsy. So we will add a slight movement to it using position. Let's create the animation keyframes. I want the letter to keep gradually moving up when it freezes. Apply easings and customize the graphs. When it flies out, you can lower the letter more using position and compensate its position with path. Let's take a look at the result. When it falls, it moves a bit. Let's fix it by moving the keyframe a little to the left. And let's make the graph steeper. Cool. Now let's add overlaps for the letter G by animating path. I'll create an overlap at the moment the letter falls. Everything is logical. The more the object accelerates, the more it overlaps. At the same time, the more it overlaps, the more soft or rubber-like it seems. Avoid creating many additional animation keyframes in order not to get into troubles with adjusting them further. Let's also add an overlap for the lower part of the letter and deform path. Good. Next, I want to create the effect of the letter spreading out on some surface, as if it is made of gelatin. In order not to animate a large number of path points, create a letter of a similar shape and thickness with stroke. Find the moment when the letter should flatten. This is, by the way, the peak of speed, and substitute the original shape with path. You could skip this step, but this way it will be easier to animate and edit it. Let's adjust the way the letter flattens. As soon as the letter begins returning to its original form, we will replace it again, but with the original shape. Duplicate it and delete all the keyframes. Now let's create damping oscillations for the letter. Although the animation of the letter consists of several layers, the movement should look as a whole. We need to change anchor point of the layer. Using the Motion Tool script, set anchor point at the bottom. Next, create the residual movement by animating scale, taking the squash and stretch principle into account, meaning we should maintain the proportions of the object. Great! Now let's add bounces. Select the keyframes and click the Elastic button in the Motion Tools script. Pay attention that I have not applied F9 to the keyframes, as the speed value should not be equal to 0 on the last keyframe of the animation for expressions to work correctly. Otherwise, expression will either fail to work or oscillations will be very weak. In the right parameter, you can enable the display of the expressions graph. Now, by changing the height of the point, you can adjust damping oscillations. Their basic settings are in the Effect Controls tab. You can leave the ones we have by default or configure them as you wish. The main thing is to make them look harmonious and avoid making the oscillations bigger and sharper than the movement itself. Let's apply the CC Bendit effect to the letter G to skip animation in the oscillations on the tip with path. This is probably the most frequently used effect. Watch the bonus video for more details. In this case, it is used for damping oscillations. You need to set the start and end points for it to work. But as you can see, if you move the shape layer, the effect remains in place. To fix this, you need to write in expression in the start and end parameters of the bend effect. Holding down Alt, click on this stopwatch. In the line for expressions, write toCompValue. Paste the same code to the end parameter. Next, adjust the location of the points again. Now, if we move the layer, it seems like the effect is linked to it. Select Static in Render Pre-Start to ensure its correct work. Let's animate the bend parameter and apply damping oscillations. Now let's cut off the tip of the letter with a mask. Select the Rectangle tool, and for the mask to work, click Tool Creates Mask. Next, duplicate this layer. Apply Invert to the mask and then delete the bend effect. Let's make the reveal of the letter at the very beginning of the animation. Move all layers to the right a little. Duplicate the layer with Path, the one that has been used to flatten the letter, and move it to the beginning of the timeline. Delete all the keyframes, leaving the original letter shape. Adjust its position. I will enlarge the letter this way to maintain the thickness of the lines. When the path shape changes, the stroke thickness remains the same. Let's animate it by making the letter a bit smaller. Now let's create another shape. It will be a line. In the stroke settings, in Line Cap, select Round Cap. Let's animate its reveal using Path. Cool. Let's finalize the residual movement of the letter G. Since it consists of two layers, we will parent one to another. Remove all expressions and keyframes from the upper layer, and parent them to the lower layer parameters. It will be easier to animate it this way. We already have a residual movement for scale. Let's animate rotation. Apply elastic to it. Add offset by shifting the keyframes relative to each other for a few frames. Thanks to this, the animation will become more expressive. The main thing is to make the damping oscillations complement your animation, not contradict it. All movements must be harmonious. For the letters O and E, we will apply damping oscillations and replace them with the original shape. For it slightly differs from our shape of the stroke, with which we created the reveal with stretching. The substitution is actually morphing in one frame. You will learn more in the lesson about morphing. Let me remind you that it is very important to make the movement look like a single whole. After adding bounces and offsets, the animation looks very cool, and no one will notice the substitution, even if there are very different objects. The main thing is to maintain the uniform speed and trajectory of movement of these replaced objects. Let's reveal the letter O and animate a mount in offset paths. Set the graphs so that the reveal matches the movement and speed of the letter. When the letter is substituted, create damping oscillations for position and scale. There is no point in animating rotation for this layer. Create the animation keyframes. Apply the oscillations and offsets to them. Repeat the same actions for the second letter O. Create the animation keyframes. Apply the oscillations and offsets to them. The letter G. We can make it rotate a little when it flies out and falls down. Apply damping oscillations to position. Since the easing is applied to this parameter, we enable the display of the expressions graph. Now let's adjust the height of the last keyframe until we get the desired result. Apply damping oscillations to rotation and configure offsets. Let's animate scale as well to make our animation more expressive. Reduce the size of the letter when it flies out. Now we can stretch out the tail of the letter when it falls. Great, let's see what we got. The letter L. We will apply the CC slant and bend effects to it. Slant has a point that defines the way distortions work. You should place it at the base of the letter L. And to make the effect follow the layer, apply 2comp value to this point, as I've already done with bend. When the letter lands, animate slant so that it tilts back a little when it is sliding. Adjust the animation. Now apply bend. Add the 2comp value expression to it, and set the start and end points. We will need this effect to create damping oscillations for the letter. When it stops, it will sway a little. Select Static in Render Pre-Start, and animate the bend parameter. After the letter stops, its top continues moving by inertia. This is a follow-through movement. Then it gets back. Let's apply damping oscillations and adjust the animation. The object is slightly trimmed by the bend effect. You need to adjust the upper point. Let's raise it a little higher. Continue setting the animation. It is necessary to catch the moment to smoothly merge the slant distortion effect into the bend follow-through movement. Now it looks somewhat too sharp. Most likely you need to make slant smoother. The result looks great. For deformations and effects tricks, see the bonus video. To the letter E, when it is substituted, also apply damping oscillations, as well as to the letter O, except here we will add another residual movement on rotation. Let's create the animation. Apply elastic and create offsets. Let's keep on setting the animation until we get the expression of the movement moving as a single whole. Same as in the case of the letter O. Let's create the reveal with the help of the amount parameter in the offset path modifier. Adjust the animation. Great, we have finished animating the Google logo. We have covered the principles of animation in practice and solidified the knowledge. In your homework, you will need to animate a logo in a similar style, using the techniques from this lesson. And that's it. Bye everyone.